Okay, so the fourth and final compendium of The Walking Dead is by far my favorite part of the series. Wow. Okay, so the Whisperers arc and its aftermath is an absolute testament to Kirkman's writing skills, and suddenly, I think all the themes of the story became very clear by the ending. My only struggle is going to be trying to put it all into words, but here is my attempt. So, now we are in post-time skip, and there are primal human beings living among the zombies, covering themselves in human flesh, and basing all of their ideology on survival of the fittest. For any Rurouni Kenshin fans out there, it reminded me very much of Shishio's philosophy of, if you're strong, you live, if you're weak, you die. There is nothing else. Placing severed heads on the pikes to mark their territory, Rick and the others ponder whether or not to retaliate against them, and Rick doesn't want to. He has cultivated a peaceful way of life and knows starting another war will bring nothing but more casualties. And also, seeing how with all of the experience of death that he's gone through, even though he mourns for those that he just lost, it's almost as if no different if they had been killed by actual zombies instead of people. But the town is not as lenient, and they want to have their revenge. And it's interesting how Rick responds to this and what he says to them. He even speaks with a locked up Negan in order to get some advice on how to maintain control of such a large group of people. And I do like how Negan is kept out of the story for a little while during this. And also one of my biggest concerns was how he would be incorporated back into the story. Well, it all starts with a younger guy who doesn't like or trust Rick, lets Negan out of prison, and it doesn't take Negan long to do away with him as he heads towards the Whisperers himself. One thing that I've always loved in all stories that I've read or watched is when villain characters interact, meet up, and even more than that, when villain characters go against one another. Negan's motives are unknown to the reader at first, but he comes across the Whisperers, a top member calling himself Beta, and of course their leader, Alpha. Alpha is a woman, and Negan comes at her with the best riz I've seen out of any character in the story, definitely swooning after her, or so it seems. He offers to become one of them, which seems so out of character at first, though through his trials, you do see how none of them tend to give a fuck about anything that happens. Nobody helps you, and if you're attacked, you have to fend for yourself. And even pissing Negan off is a girl that's about to get raped by two of them, but according to how they live and their philosophy, she can only be saved if she manages to fight them off herself. These people lead broken, disattached lives, ignoring emotion and empathy completely, and it's even too much for Negan to understand, but that's kind of how it plays into his character. He too has managed to detach himself and dehumanize others to get what he wants, but not to the primal extent that the Whisperers have. It's him that gets Alpha to admit that she does still have some emotion within her, and maybe she's not as strong as she pretends to be. But after that moment, Negan fucking kills her and cuts her head off. This moment had me shook. The man infiltrated, he earned their trust, he got the leader to open up emotionally, and then he just decapitated her. Negan is crazy. And he's definitely a prominent presence now, just as he was back in his own arc. But even crazier than that is that he did it, well, in his own twisted way, to give a peace offering to Rick. He's got nothing. He's got no one. The saviors are basically gone or want nothing to do with him. So he wants to be able to live in the town functionally and just not be in a jail cell. He could have gone anywhere, but he actually comes back to the town on his own accord and gives the severed head to Rick as a prize. And I was wondering how they were going to do Negan's story because it needs to stay nuanced. I don't want him to quote-unquote turn good, even though good and evil aren't really terms that exist within The Walking Dead, but I also didn't want him to have a redemption arc per se. And I think the comic book does a really good job at kind of towing that line, doing it a little bit, but not all the way, because Negan is still Negan at the end of the day. He's still an asshole, he still swears constantly, he's still incredibly intelligent and manipulative, but between living in a jail cell and fighting for the town, he chooses to fight for them, even putting him alongside Dwight, who absolutely hates his guts and doesn't care if he lives or dies. They basically throw Negan on the front lines as, well, he can help out, but if he dies first, who cares? Obviously, with their leader dead, the Whisperers are going to retaliate, and they bring the biggest zombie horde that has ever been seen towards the entire town that Rick set up. And it's great to see because it reminds us of what that initial problem of this comic was, motherfucking zombies. And since the Whisperers walk among them and control their direction by making subtle noises and movements, it's kind of like their own personal army. Negan does get his trademark weapon back, but it breaks when he attacks Beta, which is also a moment that you see Negan's sanity start to break. And here is where they deliver a bit of backstory and understanding for him, and that all is unveiled slowly as the giant horde breaks down the gate, and both Negan and Rick are forced to be trapped together inside of a house. And this kind of stuff I love, when you force your main protagonist and antagonist to be stuck in one location, they're forced to interact with one another, and they only have one another to rely on. It's a good moment. And it's also a moment where Negan tries to get Rick to open up and talk to him, but since Rick refuses, Negan just decides to open up himself, admitting what he did to Glenn was horrible, yet something that he felt he had to do and was able to do because of his ability to dehumanize others. We're basically all dead anyway, so what does it matter if somebody gets there a little bit quicker with Negan's assistance? It's a similar philosophy of the Whisperers, but not quite as far as they take it. But the breaking of the bat kind of reminded him about his wife's death, and that's who he named the bat after, and the feeling that he had associated with it. Basically, like he put a lock on his empathy for survival, but by being forced to remember that one incident with his wife, well, Negan doesn't outright apologize to Rick, but more like, hey, I get it, that was fucked up, and he completely understands why Rick hates him. Now, all this is done well, and it's written in an interesting way, but it doesn't make up for the events that Negan did himself. And with that, I want to jump forward a little bit and talk about the finale of Negan's character. When the dust settles from the Whisperers event, Negan is sent away to wander alone in the world. Eventually, Maggie goes after him, and she corners him alone, ready to kill him for what he did to Glenn. And Negan accepts this. He has nothing, he leads no one, he can't make amends, and so he even tells Maggie to pull the trigger, getting to the point where he's begging her to do it, to put him out of his misery. Now, this is a moment that I had been waiting for ever since Glenn's death, but I'm a little bit torn on the decision, because Maggie ultimately decides not to kill him, with the reasoning being that she doesn't want to give him what he wants, and that he will suffer more if he's alive. Which, okay, I understand, if he wasn't given free reign and he was still locked up in a jail cell. But she just kind of lets him go. And I understand the sentiment behind it, but this is it for Negan, at least as far as the main story goes. I'm sure there's side comics and side quests and stuff like that, but as far as the main series goes, this is it for him. Maggie leaves him, and then he burns his second attempt at making the Lucille bat, and then he walks away, accepting that his wife's gone for good, and so is his old way of life. But it's left up to the reader to think about what happens to him next. I'm really torn on it because I can buy Maggie keeping him alive to suffer, but it doesn't seem like he's going to. Also, he's not utilized for the rest of the series, and so this is the ending for him. All things being equal, he accepted his fate when Maggie had a gun to his head, so I kinda just wish Maggie killed him. If any character deserves to kill him, it's definitely Maggie. It's gonna take me a while to figure out if I'm okay with this ending for him or not, but here's the positive angle, and I think this is the most important aspect of it, and that's that Negan's sentiments were able to change, admittedly, because of Rick. Because Rick was able to show him another way, and that other way worked. During the Whisperer arc, Andrea is bitten. Now, Andrea has been there since the very beginning. She's grown into a great leader in her own right, and her relationship with Rick, I think, has the best chemistry of any dynamic in the series. Rick absolutely breaks over her injury and her slowly dying in the bed. And this moment hurts. Unlike any other death in the comic, this one is on another level, and it almost makes everything feel pointless, at least at first. Is Rick just not allowed to find peace or happiness? Is everything just about pain and death? Why come so far if this is going to be the result? Well, after her death and the tragedy that it is, there's this moment in the comic. Her final words resonating within Rick's mind that the world needs him. People need him. That he's managed to accomplish so much not only by trying desperately to maintain his own humanity, but also inspiring those around him on what can be done, living as if the world were as it should be to show it what it can be. He made people believe in themselves and their own potential. He established a functioning town. Even without seeing it himself, he has become this world's hero. Within the perspective of the main character, maybe we don't even see it as the reader at first, because we see his pain, we see his confliction, we see his mistakes, his self-doubt, and maybe it's similar to how we see ourselves. We only know ourselves from the inside. We know every broken emotion, we know every horrid mistake we've made, we know every bad memory, And so we don't see ourselves the same way as other people see us. There's pages of Rick falling to his knees and everyone else just placing their hands on his shoulders. Everyone else lifts him up. He made them stronger, and so they in return make him stronger. The image is saying people need you. You have to keep going, and there is still so much to do. And this is the message that Andrea leaves him with. This is what she understood about Rick that he didn't even understand about himself. And it is, without a doubt, the most powerful moment in the entire run of the comic, and what I think the underlying theme of this whole experience has been about. Your death doesn't take away from your impact on the world. It's what you do while you're alive that matters. Who you are and what you mean to others continues to exist long after you're gone, and that is the feeling of this final mini arc. So the next part begins as if it's going to be another long arc, but it's really more of an epilogue before the actual epilogue of the final chapter. The seeds are planted early. During the earlier portions of the Whisperer segment, Eugene got a radio working and was talking to somebody on it somewhere, slowly sharing information. Eventually, it's found out it's from not just a town, but like an entire giant working city called the Commonwealth, complete with people working regular jobs, football games, and even politicians. The amount of people living here is insane compared to what we've seen so far, and here, even Michonne's daughter, who we long since thought died, is still alive. The basic idea of this segment is to set the Commonwealth is meant to be set up to match our current society or the one that we would be familiar with, which means there are social classes. Michonne used to be a lawyer, so they want her to be a lawyer again and put her in a wealthy building. But others before the outbreak worked lower wage jobs, and so that's where they believed they belong, and they have a militant police force in order to enforce this. It's definitely social commentary on how socioeconomic status affects how we view each other. During the apocalypse, everybody is equal. Everybody's the same. We're just trying to survive. Rick's town has everyone do equal work. There's equal housing, equal wealth. It's more primitive, but everybody pulls their own weight in their own way, and everyone gets to live. But the thing about the Commonwealth is that it seems like it's going to be another things are not what they seem villain arc, as much as some of the people that live there are plotting an uprising, and Michonne battles with what she should do when they want her to defend the officers that beat down a civilian. And it's definitely Kirkman's commentary probably on our current society, but I don't think that it gets too preachy, even though it quite easily could have, because what it's really doing is leading towards the ultimate culmination of Rick's character arc. Riots, protests, even more zombie invasions, it all happens, but Rick Grimes is the one to stand up for everybody. He's the one that's able to make everybody stand down for a moment and listen to him, pointing out that their governor only wants to maintain power, but he knows that she can be a better person, that if they have to rebuild the world, they don't have to make the world like it was before. We don't have to imitate what didn't work before, and we could all build something new. All his trials, all his struggle, all his pain, all the wars, and his perseverance, it leads him to the biggest establishment known in the U.S. and a cry and declaration for peace. And that's the power of Rick Grimes. And if he had given up, or if he had let his demons take over, none of this would have happened. But of course, that leads to what I can only imagine was probably the most controversial moment of this entire thing. That night, the son of the Commonwealth's governor sneaks into Rick's room and shoots him in the chest. A weak, cowardly character who never experienced any real pain in his life, fumbling with a gun and pulling the trigger. The last kind of person you would ever expect to kill Rick. And in a very unceremonious way for this main character who has gone through so much to go. But here's how I see it. Death as a concept, not the specific way that you go, but just death in general, it's coming for all of us, and it's often unpredictable. No one can prepare you for it, and most people never get to die the way that they wish they could. Heroic deaths are often in fantasy, and real death is, well, real. It's sudden. It's painful for everybody involved, and it's not what we want to go through. Even though this series is about zombies, it has always treated death as tragic and unexpected. If anyone has lost a loved one, you know what that feeling is like. But Rick's death, again, does not change what Rick accomplished or what he meant to other people. Rick's legacy will go on far longer than his cowardly killers. He left an impact on the world because he didn't give up. And no matter how he died, that doesn't change what he did. But he had to have the courage to keep going in order for that to happen in the first place. Rick's death is tragic, yes, but all death is tragic, and The Walking Dead has always been very honest about that fact. The final chapter, time skips again, and we see Carl as a much older man, and ultimately he seems to have married Sophia and not Lydia. Lydia felt like a better match to me when they were teenagers, but I can buy this too because, things change and fall apart over time. Also, Carl and Sophia would now be the only surviving characters from the very beginning, so it's fitting in a way. It seems now times are very different. Carl kills a zombie and actually gets in trouble for it because zombies are now considered property, this one belonging to Maggie's son. He even has to go to court for it, and Michonne is the judge. But it's safe to say, although zombies still exist, within this past decade or two, it's become very manageable and much more rare to see attacks. And society is functioning. All possible because of the impact of Rick Grimes. The world remembers and honors him as an inspiration, but Carl remembers him on a much deeper level. Carl was with him through everything. He saw every heartbreak, every death, every breakdown, and every attempt for peace. And as Carl reads a story to his daughter that he named after Andrea, he tells her about the vision that Rick had, about how he doubted himself so many times but kept going. No matter what happened, he struggled forward. And I think that's the point. Life can be horrible, painful, messy, and unpredictable, but you cannot quit. And whether it's written down or just from somebody's memories, those you love will tell stories about you long after you're gone from this world. The ending of the series can feel a bit sudden, but again, it's the idea that death is the reality. It is sudden, but the way that Kirkman was able to express this through Rick and Carl was really beautiful. Truth be told, I was spoiled on the final chapter because I remember people talking about it when it came out, but that did not lessen its impact for me when I read it for myself. I think Walking Dead is a series that gets consistently better over time, and even if there is a few moments or choices that I don't agree with, overall, the experience was well worth it. This is miles better than the TV show, and outside all of the spin-offs and trying to milk it for profit over and over again from the franchise, this comic is the purest and best way for you to experience the story of Rick Grimes and The Walking Dead, so go read it. Anyways, guys, thank you for watching this video, and thank you for coming with me on my Walking Dead journey. I have now reviewed all 4 compendiums, so check those videos out. I'll also probably put all 4 reviews into one big video at some point, so that'll be coming out too if you want to just watch it that way. Anyways, guys, if you like this video, please leave a like and a comment because it will help it out in the algorithm. Also, if you want to support the channel on a deeper level, I have channel memberships, Patreon, merch store, link down below, as well as all the various social media links where you can follow me. Other than that, guys, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.